Hey guys, Fox here. Earlier this week, we had some pretty big news coming from Fox Sports, as on the Fox Sports roster pages for the UFL teams, we saw 100 players, yes, 100 exact players get removed from UFL rosters. Now, we all know now that these are all unsigned players. These are all players who have yet to sign their contracts to return to the league, so we're going to be looking at every single player that is currently unsigned. It is important to note a couple, and I mean like a couple of these guys have re signed, which we'll talk more about at the very end of this video with a take from James Larson, which, believe it or not, I actually disagree with. So, without further ado, let's get started with the Birmingham Stallions. Now, the Stallions were on the lower end of the spectrum. They had 5 guys who currently have not re signed. Those are wide receiver Isaiah Zuber, offensive guard Derwin Gray, defensive end Taco Charlton, linebacker Elijah Sullivan, and defensive back Mark Gilbert. Now, of these ones, of course, the two biggest standouts are Gilbert and Charlton. Taco was actually a very solid player this past season. Look, we talked about it many times before. Just because you were either A, a highly touted NFL draft prospect, or B, a good NFL player, does not mean you're going to be good in the spring football level. Taco was, right? He had 5 TFLs, 6 overall sacks, 15 tackles, was a very solid player for the Stallions. He was overshadowed by Carlos Davis, who had that great season for Birmingham, but he was a very solid pass rusher himself, Taco. Then Mark Gilbert, of course, while he wasn't as dominant this past year, in 2023 this was the USFL interceptions leader and an all-USFL player. Of course, he was a part of the defense that led them to a championship. Now, again, these are all unsigned players. It does not mean that they will not return to the Stallions, but we're getting close to that point where, again, we're less than 2 months away from the season officially starting. So any player that is still unsigned does have that kind of question of, are they going to return? Right, we did see Jace recently sign just like a couple weeks ago. So it is possible, again, we've seen one of the Brahmas offensive linemen did re-sign, Jordan Teamu re-signed, and there are guys who we're going to talk about as well. But as for the Stallions, this is not nearly one of the biggest, like, oh my gosh, there's a lot of big name players left out. You'll see what I mean. Now, the second team to talk about is the Houston Roughnecks. So the Roughnecks are very simple. It's like 4 players, and 2 of them don't even fully count, right? Donovan Manuel and Chester Kimbrough were 2 guys that were off-season additions that didn't play for them, so they really don't count. The main 2 are Jarrett Garantano and Chris Odom. Now, it's important to note this, and this goes to the point of this being unsigned players not removed from the roster, which again we'll get to at the end of the video. When the Roughnecks revamped their general manager staff and all that, they did a lot of big things in terms of gutting their roster, right? They released player after player after player. Garantano and Odom were the only 2 that pretty much survived everything that hadn't already re-signed to the team or obviously got cut. They were the only 2. And Chris Odom, as we talked about before, was an all-UFL defensive end this past season, was pretty much the only lineman from that team that either A, didn't get hurt, or B, actually lived up to the hype they had. Right, we've talked about it before. Pretty much every player that ended up staying healthy on that Roughnecks defensive line massively underperformed aside from Odom, despite Odom being the only one who had an excuse since he was coming off an injury. Now, Garantano, not a big deal, right? If he doesn't re-sign, it's not a shock. He'll probably end up getting cut or something. They already have 3 quarterbacks, and it's one of those things where we already kind of know what Garantano is, and that's not great, so not a big deal there. But Chris Odom, of course, if he doesn't come back to the team, would be a huge blow for them. Though it is possible he does return because of, again, this was a very, very talented player who's done a lot of good in the spring football level. We'll have to wait and see, though. Now, the Memphis Showboats are one of the teams that have a bunch of players, okay? 2 QBs in Case Cookers and Josh Love, running backs Darius Victor and Cyrus Habibi Lukuo, wide receivers Vinny Papele and Lee Morris, tight end Wes Saxton Jr., couple offensive linemen Jerron Jones, Marcus Tatum, Tyrone Prescott, then edge rusher Max Roberts, linebackers TJ Neal, Vontae Diggs, defensive backs and safeties and all that, DJ Daniel, Detrick Abrams Jr., Quentin Meeks, and then punter Matt White. So all of these guys are like that. Now again, this is what we'll get to later, but the Memphis does still currently hold the rights, but it appears they'll be moving on from all of them since they haven't been re-signed yet. Again, we'll get to that later. That comes back to the end, which I know I keep saying we'll come back to later. Trust me, I have a lot to say about it. Of course, the biggest ones here are seeing the 2 QBs being moved on from. At least that's what it appears to be. I've talked about it before. In terms of the quarterbacks returning, it was obvious Perez was the only one that was a for sure guarantee, and everybody else was like a question mark. Kind of feels like Cookus ain't, right? It kind of feels like Cookus and McCarron are going to be those two of the big four named quarterbacks who do not return. It just, there's that feeling. Josh Love, a lot of people were thinking he would come back from what he did at the end of the season, but I've talked about it before. T. Will is a guy that has a very high ceiling, and Josh Love is very much like a Quentin Dormady type of player. You're not going to have both of them on your roster unless your idea is to just kind of flip-flop them, since you know damn well neither of them is going to get you to a championship as the starter. But if you combine them, considering they both can be really hot or really cold, might work. Looks like they're not going to do it. So yeah. Then Vinny is one of those guys who it's very much a clear, this is not a we're going to remove them kind of thing, right? Vinny is still one of the most, like, I guess, poster childs for the showboats, right? He's in a lot of their ads, a lot of their, Instagram, Twitter stuff. Just feels like he hasn't returned yet, but it feels like he's gonna. It would be very shocking if he doesn't. Darius Victor, one of those guys who just kind of got stuck behind that bad offensive line, wasn't able to be as dominant as you've seen in the past. DJ Daniel, great defensive back. Vontae Diggs, a great linebacker that just didn't do a ton this past season. Multiple guys that if other teams had a chance to get, they would definitely pounce on the opportunity to get them. A lot of players removed here, but again, this is a team that revamped its coaching staff and general manager, not just the GM, so mass change wouldn't be shocking. Last USFL team is the Michigan Panthers. Panthers have a few guys, but not like a ton, but Brian Lewerke, the odd man out for QB, not a shock whatsoever. Running back Wes Hills had a terrible injury during the season last year, was looking really good. Again, is he still hurt? Is he going to re-sign? Is he done playing after the injury? Who knows? Receivers Terry Wright and Trey Quinn. Trey Quinn has been a great receiver for the team. Would be a huge loss if he ends up not re-signing to the team. Had over 200 yards for them. Was their third leading receiver. Great player. Derek Jeast Jr., tight end. Offensive lineman Joshua Dunlop and Ryan Pope. Defensive lineman Jesus Gibbs and Vontrell McMillan. Linebacker Bumper Pool, Keith Gibson Jr., defensive back, and then punter Brock Miller. While they do have a punter on their roster right now, losing Brock would be a big deal. Brock led the entire league in punt yards last year. Average, net average, a lot of this stuff, he wasn't the top guy, but he was among the top. Essentially, he was the, cumulative leader in terms of the overall yards, but was still up there in the other stats to show that he was just still an overall really good punter. Losing him would suck, even though they have another punter on roster, so we'll see. Then, of course, the Renegades have the boatload of players. I mean, they're the team that has like the least amount. I believe they're at like 41 of their 65 training camp roster spots right now. They have a ton of players they need to bring back. Again, the idea that they're removing all these players from their roster is insane. But in terms of who they are, of course, running back Devion Smith, one of the biggest ones, a great running back this past season. Then you have Jeremy Cox as well. A couple big receivers, Javante Payton and Tyler Vaughns. Then you have a couple other ones, Caleb Vander Esch and LaJuan Winningham. Tight end Austin Allen, a bunch of offensive linemen, Bobby Evans, Noah Henderson, Garrett McGinn, Drew Samia, Marcus Lucas. Then center Jake Lucino, who, if I'm not mistaken, just announced his retirement. Then you have center Cam Hunt as well. Bunch of defensive linemen, Tomasi Lally, Devontae Lambert, Will Clark, Vic Beasley, Bunmi Rotimi. And then you have Colin Schooler, linebacker, Ajeen Harris, all UFL defender, as you can see there. Great player this past season. He has not re-signed. Deron Evans, James Jones, Miles Dorn, Tenny Aduise, and then you, of course, have Jonathan Garibay, their kicker, who is, one of the kickers they signed. A lot of names here. The receivers, Bobby Evans, Ajeen Harris, Vic Beasley, Devion Smith are some of the big ones that are like, oh my God, they haven't re-signed those guys yet. If they were to lose these guys, these are the kind of players where if you lose them, this could really hurt the Renegades. Right, I've talked about it before online. Essentially, at this moment, with how the rosters are kind of shaping up, when you look back at my end-of-season power rankings, I had the Renegades at 4. It's becoming closer to putting them at 5, moving them down a spot if they don't re-sign some of these players. Because guys like Vic Beasley and Devion Smith are like very key players. Losing one of your best offensive linemen this past season, Bobby Evans, is going to hurt a ton if he doesn't return. Ajeen Harris hurts the back end on defense. Receivers, Tyler Vaughns was really good this season. Okay, he was like really good this year. So, yeah, this could be really bad for the Renegades. We'll have to see who they re-sign. Again, they have a bunch of room on their roster. Who knows? Now, the second XFL team is, of course, the DC Defenders, and this is the proof of the idea that them re-signing. Jordan Teamu, re-signed about 2 days ago, I believe, from when this video is being posted on Friday. Obviously, it's recorded on Thursday. I believe it was 2 days ago he got re-signed. So, again, this goes back to this not necessarily being what they talk about it as. Cameron Harris, running back. Receivers, Vincent Smith, Monroe Young, and Kiki Cootie. Tight ends, Alex Ellis, Caden Smith, and Sean Bayer. Lineman, Greg Long, Tommy Champion, William Barnes. Defensive lineman, Davin Bellamy. Linebacker, Reggie Northrup. A bunch of defensive backs, DeAndre Baker, Michael Joseph, DeJuan Neal, Nadir Rose, and then Kentrell Bryce. Of course, big ones here, DeAndre Baker, all UFL cornerback. Losing him would really suck. Receiver-wise, this team already was pretty weak at receiver. It had a couple guys that really, came alive at the end of the season. But you're going to lose potentially your 5 to 9 in receiving yard leader. I get Cameron Harris as running back, but I mean, like Smith, Cootie, and other Smith. Again, they lost a lot of Smiths here. We're all very high on that list. Brandon Smith wasn't, obviously, he's still there, but Vincent Smith, Kiki Cootie. I mean, this kind of shows that, 6 to 9 are your guys that you really don't want to lose here. And, it really sucked because then it's just, this was already weak receiving core. And losing guys like Cootie, like Smith, either Vincent or Caden is going to hurt a lot. Then, of course, on defense, while Northrup and Bellamy didn't necessarily deliver the kind of expectation you may have had, especially Bellamy was still really solid players. And again, the defense, not good last year. You're going to lose some of your better talents on defense. Yikes. So, a few guys that need to re-sign there. Then the San Antonio Brahmas are another one. Greg Elliott, if I'm not mistaken, had just re-signed as well. So again, another example of that these guys re-signing is going to potentially happen. Now, they lost Chase Garbers, Rashad Coward, Alex Millette, Delonte Scott, and Tim Ward. Now, Scott and Ward, your two edge rushers here, were both very solid players this past season. They combined for 6 sacks, over 30 tackles, 6 TFLs, over 40 sack yards. And they didn't even play full seasons. So if they played full seasons, we're talking closer, like 40-ish tackles, 10 TFLs, nearing 10 sacks kind of deal. Really solid players that you don't want to lose on a team that is heavily based on your defense. Alex Millette, center. Of course, he was a great center when he played. He did get some injuries, had that great touchdown grab in week 1. And Chase Garbers. Look, Garbers got a ton of flack, deservedly so, for that horrific championship performance. But let that not blind you that he was probably the 5th best QB in the league this past season. For the regular season, there was a time where he was an MVP candidate because he was just so damn accurate and so damn consistent. And it wasn't until like the end of the year when he was playing through injury where he kind of took a little step back. And then, of course, the championship game, it's just abysmal performance. But he was still the best QB the team had easily last year. So you're still losing him. And yes, you have Kellenmon, who's there's a lot of hype about the hometown kid returning. How good could he be? Losing Garbers, you're losing your best QB, okay? So that's got to hurt. So you really have to hope Mon does well because you also traded away Dormady. So your 2 best quarterbacks are now gone. So, you got to see. And this is one of those I don't expect him to return. I do not expect Garbers to re-sign. It's pretty tough to re-sign a guy when in the championship game you play like you don't care about it with those slides that he took, just really awful. The whole report of an NFL opportunity backfiring on him. Wouldn't want him, but again, it doesn't remove the fact that he still was the best QB they had last season, and the regular season he was a great player. Then finally, the St. Louis Battlehawks. They have a decent amount of players as well. QB Brandon Silvers, running back Wayne Gallman, receivers Marcel Aitman, Darius Shepard, Jeff Thomas, Stephen Mitchell Jr., offensive guard Vattel Alexander, defensive lineman Antoine Jackson, linebackers Lakeem Williams, Elijah Lee, defensive backs Lavert Hill, Tim Harris, Ben DeLuca, and Mike Hampton. Of course, the big 3 receivers there are Aitman, Shepard, and Mitchell. These were 3, 4, and 5 in yards per game this past season and were overall very solid receivers. Now, of course, the big caveat is this is the Battlehawks. They've signed multiple former Day 2 NFL draft picks during the offseason. They still have Hakeem Butler and Ja'Cour Pearson. So they still are a really good receiving core. It's just that, again, Marcel Aitman and Darius Shepard are really good receivers. If another team gets them, they will be upgrades and will have huge impacts. Lakeem Williams is one of those, lesser appreciated linebackers, still a solid player, 27 tackles in 8 games. But really, it's the big 3 receivers. Yes, Gallman had a lot of touchdowns, but overall, he kind of was what I feared, which was that he wouldn't fully translate to spring ball. Of course, a lot of that was that Sailors was just absurd for a running back this past season, but that's pretty much what it is right now. Again, when you look at the receivers, these are the guys you do not want to see on another team because they will be really good if they go somewhere else. Will they keep them? I don't know for sure. We'll have to wait and see about it overall. And then we get to the end of this. This is the last tweet Larson put out, so I'm going to read this one in full. Sources. In relation to the unsigned UFL players removed from Fox Sports roster pages, each team still holds the right to those players until training camp begins. For an unsigned player to make a move to another team prior to camp, one of two things would have to happen. They have to be traded or their rights be waived. If neither option is executed, they are going to be stuck kind of in purgatory until training camp from what I'm told. Not at all a fan of this personal setup in the UFL. It's robbing multiple players of opportunities. They should be true free agents if their original team doesn't plan on bringing them back. This reads as a tweet to me of just, I don't even know the best way to put it. Look, this makes it feel like he's viewing that these players that haven't re-signed are all guys that the league doesn't want to bring back. Now, is that true, or the teams, I should say. Now, is that true for some players? Of course it is. I'm not going to sit here and deny that. But the idea that all 100, again, yes, some of these guys have signed, but all 100 of these players that we mentioned today are not going to be returning, the teams don't want them, is asinine. Okay? These players can have their own reasons. They might be mulling retirement. They might be thinking about retiring, hanging up the cleats, thinking about going to another league. They might say, you know what, maybe I want to try going to, Europe or arena football for whatever reason. You never know. Then, of course, there's also the option of just they haven't decided yet. Again, Jordan Teamu, just re-signed, and this is a big-name quarterback. Technically speaking, Perez, I don't even think is officially signed yet, but he's already stated he wants to come back. So there's a lot of things that are kind of underlying that haven't been said before. And then also there's another thing. If you want the league to last, one of the biggest things you want is continuity. You want to see players returning to the same team. You do not want to see it be men's college basketball where every single year Duke is having a new starting five. You do not want it to be college football where you're seeing quarterbacks just say, oh, I played 2 years here, I was winning, but I'm not getting paid enough, let me just move. You don't want to see that. You want to see these guys being in the same team. Frank Gidno being on the Panthers for 3 straight years. Jay Sternberger coming back for his 3rd straight year with Birmingham. You want to see Perez return again for his 3rd year in Arlington. You want to see continuity. So the idea that this is robbing players of opportunity, again, for those that are planning on being cut and they're not cutting them, yes, it's effed up. But they're not doing that for all of these players, okay? It's just not. Again, a lot of it is just that players haven't re-signed yet and are still thinking about it. And at the end of the day, right, if you're a good enough player, a team will get you even during training camp. Again, people complain that the UFL season ended too late because teams already have their training camp rosters. Then come to find out they still sign UFL players who still make an impact, right? Jalen Redmond, DeAndre Tillman, Jake Bates, they all still made an impact this season, anywhere from being a day one starter to becoming a, starter or just a guy that's always in rotation halfway through the season, despite coming in at training camp. Henri St. Amour last year went to the Renegades mid-season, immediately had an impact. So the idea that this is completely robbing guys is kind of stretching it too far. Are there issues with it? Yes, I'm not denying that. But for the most part, I don't see a problem with this setup. You are trying to promote continuity. You are trying to promote keeping guys. And again, it's not like these teams haven't been waiving guys, right? Again, we've talked about it before. The Roughnecks basically waived the entire roster. The Showboats have waived a decent amount of people. So it also could be that some coaches haven't 100% confirmed they're back yet. Who knows? Maybe the reason the Renegades have is maybe Stoops hasn't, officially said something to everybody. Am I just making stuff up right now with that? Sure. But you never know. It's not just we're screwing over the players, which is what this sounds like. This sounds like Larson saying we're screwing over the players. I don't think so. Sometimes you have to think about the betterment of the league and not the betterment of 100% of your players. I hate to say it, but if 10% or 20% of these guys get kind of screwed over because they were wanting to return but to a different team and they can't, but overall it benefits the league because the other 80% either are guys that are retiring, going to a different league, or just re-sign late and keeps continuity, so be it. You know what I mean? Sometimes you just have to kind of accept what you're dealt, and sometimes you're just trying to make an issue out of something that there's not. This is one of those cases. I don't think this is necessarily an issue. Now, if you want to push it to being a bit earlier, I'm okay with it. But then again, when you're saying training camp is the earliest that you can sign somewhere, it's not even like saying you have to wait till week 1. You're getting to go for training camp, when it really matters. So I still don't see the full problem with this. Let me know what you think down below. Again, I don't see a problem with this setup right now. Again, we've seen multiple players as of recording this and when this came out on Monday that have re-signed. So it's not like these guys are not wanted back. A lot of them probably are and just haven't re-signed yet. Again, bit of a yap at the little end, but again, it's just this tweet and kind of how people have taken it have kind of put me the wrong way in a sense, where it feels like they're trying to make an issue that isn't there and trying to connect dots for something that, the puzzle has like 5 dots and only 2 of them are there and you're trying to connect all 5 dots. You can't really do that. That's what this felt like, because this came out before we saw guys re-sign. So it felt like they were trying to connect dots that weren't there. And I think now it wouldn't be tweeted like this if we knew Teamu and, the other guys were re-signing. Let me know what you think down below. This has been Sam Fox. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell. We're doing a giveaway at 1,000 subscribers for trading cards from, the USFL, AAF, and all that. And we're less than 50 subscribers away. Thank you for a new channel member. We are now up to 5 community members for the channel. You get an exclusive monthly video, exclusive team emojis, which we're about to be up to 6. I'm having a poll out for the community hero tier right now based on what the next emoji is going to be and all that. And as always, guys, have a great night.